So I just got back from the Tamiami Orchid Show in Miami last night, and it's a really fun weekend, really successful show. But normally I'd be taking today to rest and recover because it was totally exhausting. But today I'm recording this video because I'm really excited. I came home with something that's really special and a rare opportunity to paint this orchid in flowers. So I wanted to explain a little bit about what is so special and exciting about this one. So if you don't want to hear about the history of this orchid, you can skip ahead in the bookmarks to when I actually start painting. But I did want to talk about why I ended up with such a great reference material here. So at the show this weekend, our booth was right across from Waldorf Orchids, which is a really great nursery and orchid seller based in Linwood, New Jersey, right outside of Atlantic City. And I know about Waldorf because when we've done the Philadelphia Flower Show the past few years, for 3 years in a row, I would always paint orchids at the booth. And most of what I painted came from Waldorf because they're pretty much, the best plant vendor and an orchid vendor at that show. So I've painted all these Cattleyas and Dendrobiums and a lot of the things you see on my site. I actually did at the Philly Flower Show booth, straight from Waldorf's booth, and I always love seeing what they bring to that show. And being across from them at the show this weekend, I got to talk to them a little bit more, and I talked to Dave, who's one of the head growers there. The nursery's actually been around since I looked up the history. 1925, they started as a florist, and they've been there for 100 years now, over 100 years. Dave Off is well-known orchid grower. He's, I think, third generation grower there, so he's been working with orchids his whole life. And he was working the booth this weekend. I got talking to him about some of their orchids that I've painted and just, orchid stuff. And I asked him what would be a good thing to paint in his opinion. And we ended up doing a bit of a trade, and I gave him some art, and he was very generous, and I got some awesome plants here. So shout out to Dave, and thank you for hooking me up with some great plants. So the stuff that Waldorf grows, they're a big nursery. Like I said, they've been around for a long time. They specialize in, really top quality orchids that you can't find anywhere else, and especially the stuff that Dave grows I know is Cattleya species and historic hybrids. So what I've got here, this is Cattleya trianaei, and it's a awarded variety called Cashen. It's got an FCC, which is the highest quality award by the American Orchid Society. So it just has these incredible large flowers on this big plant. Something I really love about this plant is just the sheer size of it, how tall it is. That's something that you get in a well-grown example of the species, but it's mostly been bred out of most of the hybrid Cattleyas because they want a more compact plant that's a little easier to grow. Here's just a random little modern hybrid that I have. So look how compact and cute that is in comparison. So I love just how big and bold and unruly something like this is. And just to picture a giant clump of this out in a tree in Colombia would be really incredible. Something that used to be a lot more common, but unfortunately they were collected by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, starting in the 19th century. And the reason I say it's a rare opportunity to paint something like this is because, this was expertly grown by Waldorf. You get such nice flowers. The healthier the plant is, the better the flowers will be when it does bloom. And just look how big the pseudobulbs are on this. It's a huge plant, and it's really putting on a show. So I was able to bring it home while it's flowering. I'm going to do my best to grow it in my collection and hopefully get it to flower in the future, but chances are that it'll be hard for me to get such a nice show and good reference in the future without having it being grown from their conditions and by such an expert professional grower. So According to the classic Cattleya book by Arthur Chadwick, the flowers can last up to like 5 weeks. It's been through some stress and transporting to the show and stuff, so I'm not really gonna bank on that. Hopefully I will have a little bit of time to work on this. And then once again, shout out to Dave. I've got another trianaei variety here, so we'll see how I do painting this one, and I'll definitely give it a shot with this one too when it opens. He wanted to give me a backup in case these flowers don't last very long. So I've definitely got my work cut out for me, and it's going to be a fun couple of weeks while I work on these orchid paintings. So I'll try to record as much as I can and do a nice video and try to explain some of that process. So thanks for watching. First, I'm going to map out the composition with a drawing. And the biggest challenge here is fitting these 3 large flowers horizontally across the page. So I'm just going to block in the shapes and then use my eraser and the pencil to refine things. As always, I'm going to start with a very light wash of magenta over the petals. And with this wash, I'm just going to be mindful of my edges and sort of block in my shapes. As we move into the lip, we'll go a little bit darker and be very careful to pay attention to the ruffled edge and leave a little bit of white. For this, I'm using a combination of quinacridone magenta and cobalt violet as my main colors for the base of the flower. In my experience, it's really difficult to perfectly match that cool yet vibrant magenta color that you see in so many orchid flowers. It's difficult to do it with watercolor, but it's really kind of outside the color gamut of inkjet printers. It's just something that you see in nature, but it's hard to reproduce in general, even with a camera. So we have to compromise a little bit, either by using slightly warmer colors like the quinacridone magenta, or the cooler colors like the violet pigments, which end up being a little bit too dull typically. So I usually end up using some of both. The cooler colors can be used in the shadows, like where the petals overlap, and then the warmest colors will be in the lightest areas where we want the most saturation. It's not a perfect match for the reference, but it's the best we can do with the pigments that we have available. By doing a wash on top of the underlying brush strokes, it solidifies everything, kind of a glazing technique, can slightly darken the petals and soften the brush strokes. I also have a bit of what's called a flare on this particular trianaei, which is that dark pigment on the tips of the petals. Kind of echoes the lip of the flower. As I move on to the second and third flowers, it's just more of the same, blocking in the color and then adding detail after the previous layers are completely dry. I'm not someone who really likes my watercolor to be unpredictable, and the best way to keep things controlled in watercolor is to use kind of a minimal amount of water. So as always, we're going to move from loose, lighter layers and then darker, more controlled layers, typically with a smaller brush as we go. Not showing my reference very much here, but one thing that really helps is to have good light, of course, but consistent lighting will keep your subject keep the shadows and highlights consistent so that things aren't moving around. It can get really confusing if you're painting from natural light from a window and things move around throughout the day. So I've got strong overhead lights here, and each time I'm sitting down to work on this painting, the shadows on my subject are in more or less the same place. It makes things a lot easier. Failing that, you can also take photos and work from a combination of a photo of your subject and also the live reference, which you can use the live reference for the color and then the photos for some of the shapes and placement of shadows and things like that. And then the leaves behind are going to be an important framing element to the flowers in this composition. So I want to make sure everything's exactly where I want it before I put any paint back here. Okay, so it's been a little over a week since I got back to the show and started working on this. It's been kind of a crazy week and I've had a lot of distractions, so I haven't been able to focus completely on this. But these flowers are on their way out, and I'm worried that I'm not going to have a lot more time to work on them. So I can always finish the leaves later from the plant, and I'm going to leave you guys with just these flowers. Here's the painting of the flowers that I have so far. But I'm really impressed with how these flowers have held up in the week that they've been here. They survived, first of all, coming from New Jersey to Miami, and then from Miami to my home in the car, and they're still looking pretty good, starting to get a little beat up. They're still very fragrant. In the time that I've been working on this painting, the other plant that I showed opened up, and this is Cattleya trianaei, the president, and look how nice that is. And you can see the variation and the different varieties of the same species, and they're similar but not exactly the same. The fragrance is very similar on both, really fantastic. And these are both FCC awarded cultivars of this species. So if you know anything about orchid judging, you know that means these are two of the highest quality, best available of this plant. Some of the best examples of this orchid that you'll ever see. So again, wanted to thank Dave at Waldorf for helping me out with this project. So hopefully I'll have some time in the upcoming weeks with this orchid. It should be open for several weeks at least, and I can do some studies of this one as well. But I'm going to leave you with that, and thanks for watching.